maybe further to the Caspian surrounding countries. But all these ideas, either Belt and Roads or Astana International Financial Center, would intake the new thinking, revolutionary thinking, that private money or sources mostly from private sectors, even individuals as a private owner to some of those bank savings, let me say, you will probably need to question yourself whether you like to just put your savings in the account in your bank, or you would like to put that money as an alternative for building of better facilities like what we have witnessed here in Astana for the last 20 years, without the quick and prominent mushrooming building of this new city. I don't think we would be possibly sitting here to discuss something like regarding investment as sort of a asset class in terms of future investment in infrastructure. This is something very, very challenging, I tell you. But this is also the very road I think we will be collaborating together, joining our hands, and to make this happen for the future, the common future, the common better future for the people in Kazakhstan, China, and also the wider community in this part of the world. I think I should stop here for questions.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Zhao. Thank you for reminding us that we are sitting here at a city which is going to celebrate its 20th birthday in 2 days, and it is an infrastructure marvel in itself. I think it's interesting that our first panelist started talking about Hong Kong, and we ended with talk about Astana. Notice two things. I think that Hong Kong infrastructurally is probably one of the most challenging places to be. And it's quite a marvel in the way that that city has first just established its physical location. And in part, Astana's physical presence itself is astonishing as well. Notice also that part of that infrastructure is physical and part of the infrastructure is institutional. And what Hong Kong did by being a financial center, I recently had the pleasure of seeing an exhibition on Hong Kong's monetary history. And I learned that the Indian rupee was trading in Hong Kong more than 120 years ago, right? One of the first global currency exchanges before things like this formally existed, it was happening in Hong Kong. And so that institution grew on the basis of physical infrastructure. And hopefully, if the aspirations and dreams of the Astana International Financial Center are realized, this will become institutionally a place where it will be the financing hub for Central Asia. So it's interesting that we are thinking about these different places in the same conversation. I think that in the interest of time, I will change our plans a little bit. What I would like to do is to invite some questions from the floor. But what I'm going to propose is that participants pose their questions one after the other, and then we will take a set of questions, and you can direct your question to the panel or a particular panelist. I'll record those questions, and then we will provide a round of answers. So the floor is open for questions from the floor. Please, do we have a microphone or? Please go ahead at the back there. Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Will Ross. Full disclosure, I'm from Hong Kong, so I have the benefit of enjoying the amazing infrastructure. And I'm also a former securitization banker, so I was really happy to hear a lot of this panel. But my question comes down to the successes of PPPs in different parts of the globe. Hong Kong, we've seen, has been tremendously successful. The UK, where I used to live, it's been far more challenged. And so my question is, in designing the next generation of PPP for Central Asia going through Kazakhstan, is there a difference of approach that should be taken towards dealing with existing infrastructure, where the cost of maintenance and indeed making up for underinvestment is most likely the priority, versus greenfield, where it's a question of attracting the initial bridge financing to get the asset active, and then the ability to capture the incremental revenue? And I think just to build upon that final point, to take the point from Dr. Yoshino about spillover effects, is there a capacity to build in an additional equity tranche or an equity participation tranche in traditional project financing structures to allow lenders to capture that spillover effect? Because the historical problem for a lot of debt financing for infrastructure is its ability only to earn the basic level return. And the ability to actually capture some of that incremental income, which is the multiplier we're all looking for from infrastructure products, is not available to through traditional financing methods. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that question. Next. I think there's a hand up in the same row.
Hello. Hello from Tatarstan. My name is Marina. Please give us some more motivations for governments to make infrastructural projects. I like the example of near road business growing when the infrastructure is built. Maybe you have some other examples, please. We really need them now.
You mean motivation for the benefits from infrastructure, or?
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Like
Thank
spillovers that are caused by infrastructural projects.
There are a couple of hands at the back there.
Thank you. Dr. Moritz Pieper from the University of Salford in Manchester. I have a question to Zhao Changhui. You mentioned infrastructural opportunities for the Caspian surrounding countries as well. From a country risk analysis perspective, what are the chances for the realization of Belt and Road projects in Iran now with the possibility of US financial sanctions being reimposed? Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hello. My question is for Mr. Yoshino, and your presentation was really interesting, and you mentioned about income tax is one of the sources for financial sources for infrastructure. And my question is, should be the income tax be different depending on the salary that people receive?
Any other questions? All right, I think that we can start with that is a good set. Perhaps we should start with Dr. Zhao Changhui and to talk about the impact of not just the current sanctions, but the very rapidly changing global landscape for trade and tariffs and all such things, and more importantly, not just changing, but the uncertain environment that we live in today's times, and the conversation that we are having about infrastructure, which is over long periods of time.
Okay, very briefly, the world we are living right now, to me, is already drastically different to the one that we were familiar even 5 years ago. And that's to say, we're in a new era and a new world. And that would invite the more rational thinking and also the reasonable doubt for the deep down values that we cherished for business undertakings years ago. And that's the guidelines for people like me, at least, to understand and also to verify the possible opportunities and challenges for the corporate clients. For instance, the institution that I serve, China Exim Bank. Now, because of the economic landscape has been fundamentally changed. Now, frankly, I wouldn't think that China would kneel for those sanctions imposed by the United States. Up to now, just the China Exim Bank, for instance, for the last, let's say, 15 years or so, we supported China's corporate clients for many business opportunities in Iran. In that new era that we are in, I think the Chinese companies would be still enthusiastic in getting their business opportunities in Iran, in which we will be more than happy to stay fast to the possible financial inflows to them. So sanctions wouldn't be a big concern for the Chinese companies, basically. Thank you.
I think it's important to keep in mind, that the long periods that we are talking about, typical contracts in infrastructure can be 30 years long, right? No, again, to imagine what 30 years is, think about 1988, go back to there, and try to imagine if could you even think of where we would be in 2018. Yes, if you cannot, then that is 30 years from today is, if my math is correct, is 2048. The world in 2048 will look vastly different. And by the way, the smartphone is only 10 years old. So go ahead.
And to paraphrase what I said, the sort of geopolitical uncertainties or risks wouldn't be a trouble, for people like me in the business environment in Iran. If other countries, say many European countries, are so reluctant to help their companies into Iran, fine. Mr. Trump's policy measures wouldn't be that mind-boggling issue for many Chinese institutions. And I want to drive this point home. The geopolitical or geo-economical instabilities in countries like Iran is now a non-issue. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Let me let's start to Professor Yoshino to respond. And if I may just, paraphrase the question, I think both the questions raised ideas about innovations in instruments. Let me narrow the question down and make it more specific. If there were two financial instruments that you think would be effective to launch at the Astana International Financial Center as a way to bring in more finance and allocate risks as well as value, what would you recommend that they be?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions. I think in my presentation, I said user charges are not enough. So we have to bring some additional revenues. Otherwise, it is very difficult for private sector to get in. So even in this region, road, bridges, highways, then we can compute how much spillover tax revenue had increased due to each specific infrastructure. Then we can build the model at the beginning. If spillover tax revenues had been increased, 50% should be returned to infrastructure investors. And income tax rate, it is not the existing income tax rate. And it is incremental income tax revenue. Because of infrastructure, many people can start to work. Then their income goes up. And it depends on their tax rate. Some countries, their progressive tax rate is very steep. Some countries maybe not so much. So it does not matter what are the progressivity of the income tax rate. And as a matter of fact, in the Philippines, Finance Minister Dominguez liked my idea. So he's going to implement my method in the Philippines. His method is very simple. He's going to look at national average of increase of property tax, income tax, corporate tax. Then along the highways, how much tax had been increased after the completion of highway. Then he's going to charge 50% of them to infrastructure investors. So that method is very simple. And also I presented my idea in Berlin 4 weeks ago. Then the new finance minister of Germany is interested in my idea to implement into green finance. Green finance also can produce spillover effects. Then the rate of return can be increased if 50% of those spillover effects can be returned to green finance investors. So I think even in here, Astana's case, I think we can produce many, many different ways to compute those tax revenue and bring it back. As long as there's a spillover effects, then we have to commit 50% should be returned to infrastructure investors at the beginning. That is very important. And also, whoever will be prime minister, then that 50% has to be keep on coming into the infrastructure investors. Then it's a long term.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Can I turn to Dr. Yang Xiaoping? One of the questions that came, if I may paraphrase, is that the Asian model for public-private partnerships has been somewhat different from, let's say, the model in the UK or Canada or Australia. And one of the specific differences, China being probably the most prominent example, but Kazakhstan, Indonesia, India, and so on, is the role of state-owned enterprises. And so often one hears that in Asia, PPP means public-public partnerships. Would you like to comment on that and see how that idea can be adapted in Asia or used in Asia to the extent that it brings forth the benefits of PPPs?
I'd like to talk about PPP in our country. Recently, PPP program development very, very quickly. Local government very positively support or join such programs. also, we dare not to mention, to speak. Many, I think, also exist many problems in PPP in our country, because some local government take the PPP as a data platform. That's a problem. This problem already recognized by central government and undergoing to correcting of the error. Okay.
Great. Thank you. And finally, if, John, if I may turn to you with probably one of the hardest questions of our times, as I said, but one that you probably know the answer to or have something to tell us. As you said in the beginning, it was not finance that was lacking in Hong Kong when you embarked on the sorts of mechanisms that you did to build infrastructure. And as the comments here have established, finance is not lacking in the world today to build. And yet the numbers keep on mounting from billions to trillions. So what is the gap? It doesn't sound like it's a financing gap. So why aren't the savings and the investments coming together? Where do you think is the gap?
I think it's the matching between the huge amount of capital that's flowing around the world and the infrastructure needs. I think for most politicians, they would really look to some low-hanging fruits with good political mileage to spend the money that they have. Whereas investing in infrastructure is not something that could be realized in a short term, particularly during their term of service in government. If they invest now, it may be something for somebody who would come into office 10 years later. But clear enough to me, PPP, which actually means private participation in public projects, is a good assurance for good governance. Because once you bring in a private sector participation, then you are really assured that you will have to operate on commercial terms. Everything has to be transparent, consistent, as well as predictable. Nobody, I mean, I don't think that the most clever merchant banker can predict what the world will be like in 30 years, what the socio-economic conditions will be, what the political condition would be. It would be impossible for them to do that. But if you can, the government has a good business case, that could provide the assurance that there would be good governance, there would be a good rule of law in the future. That would be the assurance that the private sector requires to put their money where the mouth is.
Thank you very much, and thank you to this panel. Just a few closing thoughts, and I'm afraid they're not answers. One of the things that we get accused of at Harvard being a faculty member is that students come to our classes thinking that they will get answers to all the questions, and then they leave with some more questions. So here are some questions that I would like to leave you with. First, maybe this is a statement, but I think the top 3 risks for infrastructure, in my experience, viewed from the private sector, are political, political, and political. So, and keep in mind that whenever we talk about infrastructure like the Belt Road Initiative, connectivity, it is the weakest link which determines what the risk is going to be. So one of the significant challenges here is going to be the political risk of all of the entities that are involved in this connection. Another thing to think about is whether it is, because we measure things in terms of money, we tend to think that money is what we are short of. But it might not be money. It might be the financing gap may actually be a risk gap, or it might be a governance gap. And where we might need the private sector is not their money, but their ability to govern. to create the right incentives, to create the right kinds of mechanisms. And that's why I think a point that has been made very loudly in this panel is the necessity of instruments. Because instruments are, the right kind of instruments creates the incentives, the fears, the rewards, and a way to channel the benefits, both public benefits, wider area benefits, whether through tax increment financing and so on. And so thinking innovatively about those instruments is going to be one of the most important tasks of bringing the right kind of private capital to infrastructure. And finally, even the notion of what it means to be private. Keep in mind that particularly in Asia, a lot of capacity lies within the public sector in state-owned enterprises. And indeed, even more of that money lies within banks that are very largely state-owned. So when we talk about private, both skills as well as finance, you cannot bypass the capacity that is lying within public entities and public institutions in Asia. So the question is, how do we reap the benefits of PPP? How do we create the right kinds of incentives and yet are able to benefit from those as well as the new types of investments that are around in the form of sovereign wealth funds or pension funds and so on? So much to think about, many things to do. Thank you very much to this panel and thank you for your rapt attention.
Самұрық қазына қорының трансформациясы жалғасуда. Қазатом өнеркәсіп, уран өндіру нарығындағы көшбасшы. Біз дүние жүзі бойынша атом электростанцияларының 20%-ын шикізатпен қамтамасыз етеміз. Біздің өндіру тәсілімізді атом энергиясы жөніндегі халықаралық агенттік ең таза және қауіпсіз деп мойындаған. Трансформацияның арқасында компания өндіріс тиімділігін 2 есе арттырады. Жабдықтарды жаңарту, энергияны үнемдеу, технологиялық үдерістерді жетілдіру есебінен автоматтандыру бізге бірнеше миллиард теңге үнемдеуге мүмкіндік береді. Мақсатымыз шикізат көзінен отын өндірушіге айналу. Трансформация жалғасуда, және бұл игі істің бастамасы ғана.
Sberbank has been successfully operating in Kazakhstan for 11 years and ranks 4th in terms of assets among second-tier banks. Sberbank is the largest foreign institutional investor in the economy of Kazakhstan. Sberbank is the leader of the state entrepreneurship support programs of DAMU Fund. We actively support the development of the real sector of Kazakhstan's economy. Today, over 40,000 Kazakhstani and foreign companies have trust in Sberbank. 1.5 million retail clients use the services of Sberbank.
Еуразиялық топ Қазақстан Республикасы тау-кен металлургиялық кешенінің 3/4 құрайды. Елдің 4 тарабындағы 12 кәсіпорында 61 мыңнан астам қызметкер еңбек етеді. Еуразиялық топ кәсіпорындары кен игеру, өңдеу, энергетика, логистика және маркетинг салаларында толық біріктірілген компания. ERG. Тәжірибе, жауапкершілік, мирас.